Hey guys, it's Kevin again, and this is going to be my review for Homeland Season 4, Episode 8, Halfway to a Donut. And this episode was amazing. I loved it. By far the best episode of the season. And I was really looking forward to it because last week's episode was really awesome. The way they ended it with Carrie, basically going through like those drug problems and everything. I thought that was really interesting. Sorry, I'm just getting my phone out of my pocket. I thought that was really interesting, and it's set up for definitely a very interesting episode. And this episode was just, oh my god, it was so amazing. And I have to agree with what everyone's saying. Manny Patinkin, this was definitely one of his best episodes in a long time. He really did an amazing, amazing job in this episode. Absolutely fantastic, and just I have what, I'll definitely get to it, but let's just get this episode because I just thought it was just such an amazing episode. So I really like the way the episode starts because it starts off perfectly because the last episode ended with Carrie fantasizing about Brody and talking to Azar about it. So Carrie wakes up in a bed that's not hers. She sits up and looks around. She sees a man outside her window and struggles to pull herself together. She doesn't really know where she is. She doesn't remember any of what happened the previous night. She sees shoes by the bed, tries to grab them. She can barely stand, clings to the poster of the bed. She struggles over to a sofa, then goes to look outside, and there's a patio with a table, and she sees a guard nearby. And she walks further out, then staggers and catches herself on a chair. And there's Azar. And he asks how she's feeling, and he says that she was quite a state, and she looks around and asks if this is his house, and he says it is, and basically she's at Azar's house, which makes sense because Azar was holding her and comforting her and everything, and she asks how she got there, and he says you don't remember, and of course she doesn't really trust him right now because of course he is working with, Taz Reem and all those people, and she doesn't really know if she should trust him, and it definitely is very interesting what's going on because we don't know if we should trust him. I personally didn't know if they want us to trust him or if they want us against him. So I thought that was definitely very interesting. So basically, she asks how she got there, and he says, you don't remember. And he says his men brought her there because she was causing a commotion in the street and the police locked her up. So he asks if she really doesn't remember, and he says she told him things last night about herself because she thought she was someone else, and that's true. She thought that he was Brody and everything, and I really love the way it starts because it really shows that Carrie has no idea what's going on. It was very well done in my opinion. I really enjoyed that. She even did that weird thing with like the gun and everything. I mean, she was just batshit crazy last week. So she goes back inside and almost falls, and he tells her she needs to rest, but she says no. He picks her up, puts her in the bed, she's shivering, and he wraps the blankets around her. And he leaves her there, and Lockhart asks if they've found Carrie, and Quinn says they're still looking. So they're headed to meet with the Pakistans, and basically they have no idea where Carrie is. The last time, she said to give her like 10 minutes, and then she didn't come back, so obviously they're very concerned about her. It obviously makes sense why they're concerned about her because she said, oh, I'll only be a few minutes, but then like she never came back, so about her. So Azar shows up as part of the Pakistani group, and he runs into Tazreem. So I was kind of thinking, is Azar in on it? Does he know what's going on with these drugs? Does he know that Tazreem and Dennis gave Carrie these drugs? I was kind of wondering that. And he says he had an unexpected guest, and she says she knows and asks why he intervened. And he says that she was out in the street acting crazy and they didn't need another incident. And she asks why he thinks Carrie was acting like that. And she says she would have been on a plane relieved or at her post if he hadn't intervened. So she's very angry. She stomps away and they all head into the meeting. So we can tell right away that he has no idea what's going on. He doesn't know that Carrie was drugged. And I thought that was definitely a very well done scene. So Saul is then woken up. He's put into chains. He's hauled out and put in front of a flag so that he could be seen on the video screen at the meeting. And he looks at the message and the camera and says, don't do a fucking thing they ask. And they drag him out of sight. And Lockhart says to tell them if Saul is hurt. All bets are off, and Tazreem says she'll try to convey that message. So Haqquni is there, then reading off a list of names, and Lockhart asks if they are prisoner names. And Tazreem says that they are being held at Bagram, and Lockhart reminds them that Haqqani also killed Pakistans, and Tazarim says those are Haqqani's demands, were to kill the Pakistans. So Lockhart isn't really buying it, though. He doesn't think this is really what's going on with Haqqani. So they agree to meet tomorrow after talking to each of their governments, and Saul is taken back to his cell. He fights his captors, and he's knocked out. This was an awesome scene. I thought this was so well done. He's knocked out to the floor, then takes another opportunity to steal a nail he saw there earlier. He hides it in, and they once they leave, it begins to work on his chains. So it really makes you think he's gonna bail himself out. And I myself is kind of like, it kind of feels like it's too early because we're only on episode 8 and there's 4 episodes left. So I kind of felt like it was a little too early, but I thought it was definitely very well done here. So Carrie's up and about as Czar. She sets out a couple of pills to take, and she's about to take one of them. However, she spits it out, and it makes sense why she's not going to take them because obviously they made her go crazy, and plus she doesn't know if these are the pills that were, contaminated. I mean, the pills the fake pills that they gave to her. So she is very confused right now, and I thought that was definitely a good decision that she made to not take the other pills because in the long run, if she had taken those other pills, it would not have been a good thing. So Azar comes in and asks if she's feeling better, and she asks why his men were following her. And he says that they weren't, and he says the police were called on her because she was acting crazy. And she says she thinks someone tampered with her medications, and he says nothing, and then asks if she thinks he did it. And he says he didn't do it, and she asks who did. She pretty much thinks it's him because he was in the room. It makes sense why she thinks it's him. We know it's Dennis, but she doesn't. Of course, she thinks it's him because she was in his house. It makes sense why. And she asks who did, and he says he has no idea. She asks if he'd tell her if he knew, and he says he'd save her, and she needs to rest, and she says she's leaving, and he offers to drive her back to the embassy, but she says she can get herself there, so she really wants nothing to do with him. So she goes to the doctor and has blood drawn, and the nurse brings her new medications, and Quinn comes in, obviously very concerned because no one has any idea what happened to her. And Carrie says that they have a breach because someone got in and swapped her meds. So she meets with Lockhart and Quinn. He asks who could have done it and wants to tell the ambassador, and she doesn't want to tell anyone. So they tell about the prison exchange, demands to get Saul back. It's all of Haqquni's command structure, and she asks what the plan is. And Lockhart says there's no plan. He says no one wants this, not even Saul, but can have Saul's head in a basket, and he asks her what to do. So she basically says they need to find another way, and he says he needs something more specific, and he also says he needs to tell the ambassador what happened to Carrie. And he leaves, and Carrie asks what happened to her last night, and she says she has no idea what happened, and she woke up at Azar's house, who says he picked her up from police lockup, and she says they exploit a weakness, but Quinn says they poison her. And she doesn't know if she should believe him or not, so obviously she's very confused. So Saul's working on his handcuffs. This is a really awesome scene. He's in pain. He's trying to hurry. He obviously knows that, he needs to be careful because if Haqquni could end up killing him. He knows what's at stake here, but he does not want to go out like this. He doesn't want to be captured. He doesn't want this to happen to him. So he's doing whatever he can to break free. So he hears noise and has to stop. He lies down, coughs as a guard peers in through the window on his cell door. He goes to work on the cuffs once more. The men move in. He gets one hand loose. He hears voices again, but keeps working. Lockhart goes to see the ambassador about the breach, and Lockhart says it feels like a war. And he tells Boyd he doesn't know how she sits across from the Pakistanis every day, and she says that's what being a diplomat's about. And he says that they hate us, and Dennis comes in, and of course, Dennis, I don't trust him, obviously, because Dennis, as we know, is the one that gave the pills to Carrie, and he's working with Tazreem. So obviously, Dennis is a very shady person right now. So Lockhart does not look happy at all. Now, I was kind of thinking, does Lockhart, partially know what's going on there? Because he was working with Dennis, he might know what's going on there. He's brought her a treat, and that's halfway to the donuts. And that's why the episode's called Halfway to Donut. And as we know, Martha wants to leave the CIA, and he's basically trying to convince her to stay. So she tells him to stay inside for a while, and says to find someone else to cover his class. She says it's not safe. And she tells him there was a breach at the embassy, and he can't tell anyone. He agrees, and she told the breacher about himself. And she tells him to be careful, and a guard hears a noise and goes into Saul's cell. He finds the man has hung himself, and I'm like, Saul killed himself? There's no way Saul killed himself. He grabs a bucket, stands up to cut him down. He does, and then Saul, this was just so awesome what happened here. Saul attacks him, only faking suicide, chokes the man to death, and he's dead. So I was very surprised that happened. I was like, Saul really is awesome. Saul's a total badass, and I love that about Saul. I mean, Saul's a character that really has not had too much to do this season. Yes, he got kidnapped. Yes, he's had stuff to do with Carrie, but this was Saul's standout episode. I mean, Saul had so many good scenes. Manny Patinkin in this episode, it really shows that Manny Patinkin is an amazing actor and such a versatile actor that can really do so much with emotion and can do action scenes so well. He is just such a talented actor, and he really is just absolutely fantastic. And he did a great job with this episode, definitely. So he rolls the guy over, then searches him. He takes the guy's cell phone, calls Carrie as he runs outside, and he tells her it's him. And she runs to wake Quinn and says Saul escaped, but she doesn't know where he is. So she says he's calling back in 11, and she has Redmond and the others ready when he calls. And he asks what to do, and he says they have to locate him. He says it's pitch black, and they work to track the cell signal. So they pull up a map, and Quinn tells him to calm down. And Saul says he's just in bad shape, and they tell him to be quiet since sound travels. And he says just tell me what to do. And Redmond says he's near Macon where they have an asset, and Quinn tells him to go up to a ridge line, and he makes it there and tells them to get him out of there. They tell him to look for lights on the valley floor, and they tells him they have an asset there. But the thing is, it's 20 miles away. So they give him the asset's name and tells him it's a grocer and that special forces will extract him there. And Quinn tells him it will be radio silent until they extract him. But Saul asks to talk to Carrie alone first, and she steps up to take the call, and she says it's just them. He says he won't be recaptured. He doesn't want this to happen again to him because he just spoke free. He does not want to be with Haqquni. He wasn't comfortable with them. First of all, Haqquni is just such a racist person. He's against Christians. He is a very ferocious, brutal man. He does not want to be stuck with Haqquni because he is the complete opposite of Haqquni. So basically, he tells her no one can suffer from his mistakes, and he asks her if she hears him, and she says she does. Um, he makes her promise to drop a bomb in the whole mess if anything goes wrong. He says escape or die and tells her to promise. So basically, he is willing to die over Haqquni because he wants Akane dead, but if he has to die in the process, then he'll take it. And I think that's awesome about Saul, that he is willing to die to save the Pakistans and save, everyone that's at risk here. And I think that's just amazing that Saul wants to do that. But of course, Carrie, we think is going to help him there. So he repeats back the extraction information to her and enters the call. So Dawn finds him still walking the village, wrapped in the guard's cloak, and Carrie says he's almost there, and they tell her special forces in 90 minutes away, and Quinn asks Carrie what Saul said to her, and she says he made her promise to escape or die, and Quinn says it won't come to that, and she says she hopes not. She doesn't want Saul to do that. We can tell right away, Carrie does not want this to happen to him, and I kind of see why, because Saul is Carrie's father figure. That is why she wants him to live, because she really does love Saul. I don't think Carrie really has admitted it, and there was actually someone, I read a review here, someone said they wish that Carrie would have said that to Saul. I don't think she's going to until maybe the end of the season because they've been through so much together, and it really shows that Carrie and Saul do have a great, like, father-daughter bond. Like, he really is of the father figure in her life, and I think that definitely was just really well done the way they did that. So they're all wondering if Saul had escaped, and Dennis approaches Tazreem and says they know about the pills and that Carrie's on a rampage to find out who poisoned her pills, and obviously they don't want their cover blown, so she says she had something for him to do, but he says it's too hot, and she hands him a napkin, and Azar sees the exchange, and now he knows. So I thought that was just an amazing scene because he knows now, and he knows what's going on between Dennis and Tazreem. He knows that they were the ones that did it, and I'm like, he's definitely going to tell Carrie because Azar doesn't seem to be a bad guy. He seems to be someone who Carrie can trust, someone who will give Carrie that trust, and who will stick with Carrie. So I definitely like that about his character. So the ambassador starts the meeting with a daily proof of life demand, and she next says one of the names on your list, and the Pakistani Rep Bunny says it's not on their list. So she says one of the men has an infection, and Carrie slips a note to Lockhart that the Pakistanis don't seem worried. And Saul, meanwhile, lurking in the alley across from the grocers, he says he sees a man open up his shop and then walks in and calls out to the man. The guy pulls a gun on him and asks who he is. And Saul says, "Didn't they say?" And he tells Saul to shut up. And Saul says if he doesn't know what he's talking about, shoot him. Otherwise, he's come for help. And Carrie watches Tazreem. Boyd works through the list, and Carrie steps out of the meeting, and Lockhart follows. And Tazreem smiles as they go. Carrie tells Lockhart they know where Saul is. Obviously, this is not, Lockhart wants to know where Saul is, and Carrie tells him that she knows. So I thought this was just an amazing. This is when the episode just got so much more. The episode was already amazing, but the episode just got so much more amazing here. I love this part because Carrie comes in and says they don't have to find Saul. All they have to do is find the drone. That's what they have to do. And she says they know where help is coming from. And Lockhart says that's why they're being so smug about it. Says they have to give the team a hand up. And Carrie calls the Special Forces team, but then they lose their radio signal. So Carrie tries to warn them, and they're all in an old VW bus. And they curse and try to call in and tell the Taliban are literally everywhere. And they have to reroute. And Carrie says it will take them forever. The grocer tells Saul that Haqquni is Taliban and came there shutting down the school and pushing for Sharia no one wanted. And he says they killed his father, and then everyone else backed down. He says he called the Americans the next day, and Carrie calls just then, asks Saul how he is. And this scene was just amazing. Claire Danes and Mandy Patinkin, amazing stuff from them this episode, I gotta say. They did some great stuff here. He says he's ready to go, but she says there's been a change of plans. She says she wants him to move to the south edge of town for a pickup, and she tells him to take an alley to the hospital. She says there's a park behind the hospital and says to take the phone and keep it on. The grocer also gives Saul a gun to take with him. They watch him leave via drone. The grocer steps outside, sees a truck full of armed men rolled into town and disperses, and Tazreem gets a text during the meeting. And Boyd says she's sorry, Martha says she's sorry about the delay, and Tazreem says it's okay. And she's sure Lockhart and the others will be back soon. So Special Forces call in and say they have been stopped by Taliban. So Taliban approach and they open fire, and they return fire and throw it in reverse. And basically, Carrie wants them to press on, but they have to back away because of the Taliban presence. And she sees on the drone that the Taliban are all over and calls Saul, and she tells him that there's Taliban all over and everything. And obviously they are tracking him, and Saul says there's too many of them. She tells Saul to hang tight. He says he can't get through, and he sits down and says no. She says to keep moving, but he says he won't go back to those people. So he tells her they had a good run, that they were everywhere, and he says there are too many. He puts a gun to his head, and he is ready to commit suicide. Like, this scene was just, oh my god. Like, I honestly thought Carrie was gonna tell him that she loved him. I personally thought she was, because you can tell that Carrie does genuinely care about him. I mean, she's starting to cry here. She says she's in the ops room and can see that it can work. She tells him to do exactly what she says, and Quinn tells her they can't get Special Forces there. She tells Saul they're waiting for him at the rendezvous. He's crying hard now. He still has the gun in his hand. And she tells him to exit the courtyard. He stands and tucks his gun into his pants. She tells him to take a right the alley. He says that's the way he came. He rushes out. She sends a few down a building, and he sees more Taliban. She directs him to the door. He says it's locked and tries the next few, then ducks into a building. She says to look for an exit across the building. He sees one. She says it will take him to a street where there's parked. He's surrounded. She sends him directly into their hands, and she's obviously very upset because she sent them directly into their hands. And he's screaming out, and he's just screaming out. He's like, you fucking lied to me. And he curses her and calls her a fucking whore and everything. Like, he's obviously pissed at her because he did not want this to happen to me. He specifically said to her, I don't want to be recaptured. And he was. So obviously Saul has been recaptured, and he's on the verge of dying now. And he was willing to die for Haqquni. If killing Haqquni meant he had to die, he was willing to do that. And I don't understand. I mean, I do understand why Carrie didn't want to do that, because she really does think of him as a father figure. But that's not what happened, so now he was captured. So basically what ends up happening is she tells him to turn off the sound. Lockhart says he's going back to the conference room. He says he was looking forward to telling the Palestinians to go fuck themselves, but that can't happen now. And I obviously knew that was not going to happen. I knew that Saul wasn't going to be completely okay because it's only episode 8 and there's more episodes to go. So he goes back in and sits, and he tells them to tell Haqquni they'll meet his demands. And that's obviously not a good thing at all, because he doesn't realize that that is not what Saul wants. They're doing the complete opposite of what Saul wants them to do. So Tazreem does not look surprised. The Pakistanis stand and leave, and Carrie tells Gwen she was trying to do the right thing and may have steered him to his death, and she says she betrayed Saul, and as how saving his life could be the wrong choice. But it was. It was the wrong choice, because that's not what Saul wanted. He didn't want her to save his life, because he was willing to risk his life for everyone. And honestly, after this episode, Saul is my favorite character. I gotta say, Saul's the best character in the show now, because he was willing to risk his life for everyone and would do that. And I just think that's amazing, the way that he wanted to do that. And she basically says that there was nothing but wrong choices, and she says nothing good can happen in their world. Quinn says they've been up for 2 days and says they need some rest. He tells her goodnight, leaves Carrie to put in her earplug, and goes to bed with her sleep mark. She climbs under the covers, turns off the light, her phone rings, she takes the call, she leaves the embassy in the rain to meet someone, and we get the last scene. It's a czar. And he approaches and she says, "You won." And he asks, "Did we?" And she asks what he needed to tell her, and he says he didn't. He tells her straight out he was not the one that did it. And she says he already said that, and he says he needs her to believe him. He says makes everything so hard. He says that she complains about distrust, and she says what they did to her was fucked up, and she says maybe it's fair, and what they do to each other, but it didn't feel fair, and she says she believes him, and he walks back over closer, and she says she knows he's telling the truth, but she remembers some of it now, so she's starting to process some of it. However, she says the part at the end with him is part of what she remembers. And then he tells her that it was Dennis Boyd. And all he says is he's working against you. That's all I can say, because that's all he knows. So Carrie's definitely going after him. Shit's about to go down, and I can't wait. And this episode was just, oh my god, it was so amazing. Mandy Patinkin in this episode, Claire Danes, such amazing stuff from them. Definitely some bad's gonna happen to Saul. I don't know what's gonna happen to him, but definitely Saul is going to be pissed at Carrie for what she did. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what's gonna happen in the next episode. But let me know if you guys saw this episode. I personally I loved it. I thought this episode was so interesting. I love the second half of the season is about Saul and Carrie. I gotta say, first half of the season I love, but this half is so much more interesting because now it's basically Carrie just betrayed the guy that cares about her the most, the guy that was willing to risk his own life for her safety, and she didn't want him to do that. She wanted him to live, and it's just so sad. And I almost cried when Saul was captured. I really was. And that's basically my review. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know if you guys saw this episode. What's going to happen now with Carrie and Dennis? She's definitely going after him. Carrie and Saul, this is not going to end well. I kind of feel like Saul's going to die. There's a scene in the promo where it looks like they kill him. And if they kill him, that's what Saul wanted, but he didn't want to be recaptured. He wanted Haqquni to kill him. Um, are they going to get Haqquni? I don't know if they're going to get him. I don't know. We'll have to see what happens in the next episode. I mean, the show is really unpredictable. So that's my review. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in my next video, which will be my review for The Affair. So I'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.